Okay, I'm Nicole Jansezian for All Israel News, and I have the pleasure of speaking today to CBN News Senior International Correspondent, George Thomas. George, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with us. I know you're sitting in a war zone right now, so can you please tell us where you are and what's happening?
Sure. So I am right downtown in Kyiv, the capital city. Today is day 27 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We're actually in the middle of a curfew. The mayor of Kyiv yesterday imposed an 8 p.m. yesterday evening curfew till tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. So in essence, we cannot leave our home. We cannot get out on the streets. And the last time the mayor imposed one of these kinds of 32-hour curfew, they used the curfew time to launch counter-offensives against the Russian forces. In fact, last week, they pounded Irpin and Bucha. If you look at a map of Kyiv, these are two cities, strategic cities that lie in the northwest part of the city. And last week they reportedly pushed the Russians about 70 kilometers from the capital city. And the initial reporting right now, unconfirmed, but the initial reporting is that they are continuing those counter-offensives in Irpin and as well as in Bucha and in Kharkiv. And in fact, as I speak to you today, as of today, they have managed to recapture Makarev, which is on the west side of Kyiv, in essence, a suburb. It's about 35-40 minutes from downtown Kyiv. And I was, in fact, in the Makarev region last week, very close to Makarev, and there were intense battles between Ukrainian forces and Russian forces to sort of recapture this part of the city, of the area from the Russians. And it looks like, according to the Ukrainian armed forces, that they have managed to recapture Makarev. It's strategic because if you to look at a map of Kyiv, in essence, the Russians are coming in from the north and the northeast, and they're making their way down south, trying to encircle the city. And so Makarev is on the west side, and they were kind of coming southwest, coming in, trying to encircle the city. And so obviously strategic that the Ukrainians have been focusing their attention, making sure that that corridor, that area around Kyiv is still in their control, and that the Russians are being pushed further and further away. All of this happening, Nicole, as the efforts down in the south by the Russians continue, the continuing bombardment of Mariupol, a strategic seaport for the Ukrainians. They've come under intense bombardment over the last 4 weeks. The latest numbers are that some 40,000 people have managed to escape, to evacuate from the city, but there are maybe 250,000 to 300,000 people who are still trapped in that city with no water, no electricity, no heat, no internet connection, no food. And they are, in essence, surrounded by Russians, and the Ukrainians are in the middle, vowing to fight to the bitter end.
Wow, that's a dire report. We have a friend here that we've spoken to who has family in Mariupol and hadn't heard from them for 3 weeks and just made contact. And now I don't know if they've also are if they're among the ones evacuated, but they've managed to survive until now. And we know the situation there is extremely bad. So what are you, it's just, we're hearing news about all these regions and these cities, and you're sitting there in Kyiv. What are you seeing? And, what you've been to other places, but, so what are you seeing? What kind of destruction?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think like yesterday, for example, I went to the Retroville mall that was hit 2 days ago by a Russian missile. In fact, it was 2 days ago was probably the loudest rather, explosions that I have felt since I arrived in the city about a week and a half ago. And in fact, those who have been here for 27 days say the kind of explosions that happened 2 days ago were the largest since the start of the war. But I went to this mall. I went in. It was the back end of the mall was completely destroyed. We weren't allowed to film for security reasons, but outside it has all your major Western name brands there. I saw one sign of H&M, popular clothing store. Their sign was completely destroyed. And so you're seeing this, we haven't seen any significant attacks in the very heart of the city. For example, this attack that happened 2 days ago happened in the northwestern part of Kyiv, probably about 10 miles rather, from where I am in the center of the city. And it's kind of expected because this region, again, this northwestern quadrant of the city is very close to where Russian forces are in the cities of Irpin and Bucha and Homostel. This is where they're concentrated. And so their artillery fire is in that striking range of the northwestern part of the city. In terms of the overall feel of downtown Kyiv, it's a fortress. I was yesterday, two days ago, I was on Maidan rather, which is the very heart of the city. It's a fortress. They have these huge metal structures that kind of look like a cross, like an X. And they are, in essence, tank stoppers. They're aimed at stopping Russian tanks. They've got concrete slabs all over the place on top with sandbags. Almost every mile and a half in almost all directions, there are huge concrete barriers where you're having to zigzag. And that's a technique you see around the world in war zones. It's a way to stop the advancement, or rather slow down the advancement of enemy forces. So they erect these concrete barriers so that civilian cars have to go around them, take their time going around them. And then obviously you have the checkpoints manned by both Ukrainian forces as well as civilian defense forces. They're checking your ID. Yesterday I was in a Uklon in a taxi, and I was by myself. I had just returned from the Retroville Mall, and the security at the security checkpoint, they asked for my passport, and then they spoke to the driver and asked him, "Does this guy in the back speak Russian?" Obviously, I don't speak Russian, and then I presented my passport and my press credentials and so forth. But again, they're obviously on the lookout for collaborators in the city, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're here laying low for whatever time and whenever they get activated. But it's a fortress. Half the city has evacuated, and more continue to leave every day.
Okay. Now, tell me, as a journalist, I'm interested to know, because also for us, trying to keep our finger on the pulse of the war, but from Israel, from Jerusalem. Obviously, I don't have the same access as you do. So I'm trying to keep my coverage related to Israel and the Middle East. But I'm wondering, there's a lot of, let's say, fake news or news that turns out to be false, and a lot of propaganda that we've encountered. And I'm wondering, as a journalist, how are you able to decipher what's coming at you and what is accurate to report?
Yeah, you have to look at sort of a plethora of resources, right? So, for example, when the figures of the number of Russians who've been killed thus far, right? You got to take some of that with a grain of salt. You compare it with what Western intelligence is reporting, and what the Russians are reporting and what the Ukrainians are reporting, right? So, for example, a few hours ago, a pro-Kremlin magazine tabloid group released, I don't know if it's accidentally, but released numbers in terms of the actual toll right now. And according to their reporting, it was about almost 10,000 Russians have died, and about 16,000 have been injured. As of today, just numbers released by the Ukrainian Armed Forces, they say about 15,000 troops have been killed so far in action. The Department of Defense released numbers last week that were around the 8,000 ballpark area. The truth of the matter, the reality is that if you look at what has happened over the last 27 days in terms of the losses, be it on the low end of numbers, from the 7,000 range to upwards of 13, 15,000 range from the Ukrainians, what is absolutely staggering is the number of troops that the Russians have died. If you look at what the number of troops that Russia lost during, for example, the Soviet Union Afghanistan war, which took place over a 10-year period, the Russians lost 15,000 of their soldiers in a 10-year period. In 27 days, as of today, they've lost between 7,000 and about 15,000 troops. So when it comes to those kinds of numbers, you're looking at a variety of sources, from the intelligence services of the United Kingdom to our DoD, to what the Germans, the Ukrainians are saying, and I think you see it on the ground. The assessment was that the Russians would take the capital city within a 24 to 48-hour period. We are day 27 into this. They have not taken the capital city, yet they continue to make advances in other parts of the country, be it the north, the northeast, the southern parts of the country. And so you just have to look at these numbers. And frankly speaking, I'm not necessarily reporting numbers. That's not the sort of the beat that I'm covered, right? So I'm looking at more of the human angle and the toll it's taking, and the impact of these numbers on the ground in terms of a military operation, but then also in terms of the human toll it takes on families, on individuals. And like, for example, we had this reporting in the last day or two that the Russians had taken some 2,500 children and other people from Mariupol and have placed them allegedly in concentration camps. Right. So when you hear something like this, okay, we don't necessarily report on it, or we hold on it for a little while to see if there's any corroborating evidence. Obviously, it's a very shocking detail because it harkens back to what the Nazis did to the Jews in that time period. And the mayor of Mariupol has made this claim, again, unverified to this date. But again, we wait to hear from family members, perhaps of those who are able to communicate from these reported concentration camps, these camps rather, on the Russian side. So again, it's that you're always going to get that in the fog of war. It comes with the territory, and you have to double check, triple check. When you have these somewhat sensational headlines and figures, in order to make sure that you get the story right in the process.
That's what I really appreciate that. No, it's good to hear. It's we're all trying, and I've heard it's a statement I'm living by these days. It's more important to be right than to be first. So
exactly,
that's what
for
we're
sure.
trying to do. So speaking of the human interest angle, the humanitarian angle, I know that you've had contact with churches in Kyiv, and can you tell us, maybe not just Kyiv, but tell us what the church is doing during this time?
Yeah, absolutely heroic. Not just the church, but everybody in this country that has banded together. I think Vladimir Putin, in his aspirations to invade, conquer Ukraine. He thought he could divide Ukrainians. And 27 days in, Ukraine is united like never before. And they are banding together to help complete strangers. Like, for example, yesterday, I joined a small group of Ukrainians who spent a few hours going to the adjacent apartment next to where I'm staying, climbed 12, 15 stories to deliver supplies. They had in their bags, they had onions, potatoes, salt, flour, oil, coffee, toilet paper, diapers. They had noodles, canned meat, canned fish, and they're delivering this to those who are unable to get out of their apartments for whatever reason. Most of those that we helped yesterday were the elderly. Today I got off the phone with a church pastor who is actually still in Erpin, which is unbelievable, really. When folks are trying to get out, the church, this particular church, in the early days, they were sheltering between 500 to 600 refugees. Those numbers have come down tremendously, but they're still there, and their church doors are open, and they are literally behind Russian lines. And they continue to serve the community. They continue to evacuate people. I'm doing a story right now on these brave drivers, Christians, many of them who are crisscrossing the country, evacuating people, going into dangerous situations. I interviewed this one guy yesterday, 2 days ago, David, who was a maintenance guy at a particular NGO group. And now today, he goes almost every other day into Chernihiv, which is directly north of Kyiv. And they are almost, the reporting as of today is that they're almost surrounded by Russians. And he has, according to him, rescued about 100 people thus far. And he describes just how every time he gets in his car, he doesn't know if he's going to make it out. And so the church continues. They're very, very active. The humanitarian arm of the Christian Broadcasting Network, Operation Blessing, Orphans Promise. Orphans Promise has more than a dozen centers across Ukraine. They've been in the country for the last 17 years and have a very deep network of partners with churches, para-church organizations, NGOs, doing tremendous work. And now Operation Blessing is on the other side of the Ukrainian border in Poland, setting up warehouses, getting all kinds of supplies and aid supplies, and then trucking them into Ukraine and distributing them to all of the various partners that we have in the country at the moment. But it's incredible. I did a story 2 weeks ago of this young 22-year-old resident of Lviv who opened her home to complete strangers who were fleeing from Kyiv. 3 girls who came. She didn't know them, but yet the one thing that bonded them together was the fact that their nation was being turned upside down. And she gave them shelter. And you see that today everywhere. You see it in businesses because there are so many places that are empty, right? So restaurants that are closed have opened up their seating area and laid out blankets, laid out mattresses. You see it in office spaces. You see it in churches and Jewish synagogues. I did a story on a Jewish synagogue in Lviv, one of the largest, most prominent Lviv Orthodox synagogues in the city, opened up its doors to people. I think that's the sort of the spirit you see today in Ukraine, across the nation, people trying to, in whatever way they can, to help their fellow countrymen.
Well, that's amazing. Are you in danger of running out? Like, is the city, specifically Kyiv, is this in danger of running out of food supplies?
Not right now. There's no indication. There's no run on food necessarily. Like, for example, yesterday when I went out right before the curfew, there were long lines at banks, at pharmacies. I think it's typical when you. I mean, I think we saw this during COVID times, right? So when people were talking about a lockdown of the city, people get a little concerned, maybe panic buying. So people went to the pharmacies, to the grocery stores, to the bank to get some extra money, extra groceries, and so forth for this 32-hour period. But there's no indication that that supplies are running here. Keep in mind, the southern part of the capital city is wide open, right? It's wide open. That's in fact the way I got in here once I left Lviv in the west and made this 17, 18-hour journey to the capital. Obviously it takes a lot shorter, but we had to take this circuitous routes that would avoid potentially running into Russian forces. For example, from Lviv, you can pretty much just draw a line straight to Kyiv, but you're going through, for example, the Zhytomyr Oblast. Oblast is another word for a region or a province. But again, there is intense fighting here. So, you had to go further down, take side roads. And then we made our way up, coming in from the south into Kyiv. So there are supplies coming in. That's not an issue. Obviously, it's not the same for Mariupol, completely surrounded. They have no water, no food. That's a different situation. But right now in Kyiv, it looks pretty good.
Okay. So there's reports today in the Israeli media that Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said to President Zelensky that maybe he'll go visit him in Kyiv, because a couple of weeks ago he went and he met with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. So what would be your advice to the Israeli Prime Minister? Should he come or not come?
I think there's also talk about President Biden making a trip here to Kyiv following his trip to Europe this week to meet with NATO allies. Look, other countries, heads of state have come here, Slovenia, Slovakia, Estonia, Lithuania, as a show of support. I think the reporting, you know better than I think the reporting from this perspective, from the Ukrainian perspective, is that they want Israel to take a more firmer stance in relation vis-a-vis the sanctions on Russia, whether it's speaking out against Putin. Obviously, like for example, the Israelis have set up a major field hospital in Lviv, very close to the Ukrainian border. So I'm sure that in these kinds of situations, when you're dealing with delicate geopolitical relationships, right, that there are things happening behind the scenes that maybe you and I in the press are not, that we are aware of. So in terms of negotiations, whether it's other kinds of military and non-military assistance that the Israelis are giving to the Ukrainians during this time. Obviously, President Volodymyr's message to the Knesset the other day, was, bristled perhaps and rubbed Israelis and the society slightly in a different way. But again, I'll leave that up to the two countries to figure out what's the best tact to approach in this situation. But I think what you see clearly from a geopolitical standpoint is a seismic shift in the sort of alliances and the sort of the East versus the West, right? You see how China has positioned themselves, how Beijing has taken this sort of, pro-Russian position, right? Saying that the sanctions on Russia are not beneficial, that there needs to be a peaceful resolution to the situation. I mean, how do you say it's a peaceful resolution when you are clearly outgunned, outmaneuvered, outspent in terms of military assets on the ground, and it's all one-sided? And the Ukrainians will say that. I interviewed one person yesterday. There's a saying here in Ukraine that says something to the lines of, if Russia lays down their weapons, there will be peace. If the Ukrainians lay down their weapons, there will be no Ukraine. And that is how Ukrainians feel, that they made an agreement with Russia, with the UK, with the United States, during the Budapest writing of the Budapest Agreement, which in essence in the 90s, that in exchange for the territorial integrity and protection of Ukraine, that Ukraine would give up its massive nuclear weapons stockpile. That was the Budapest Agreement. Well, guess where we are today? And part of that agreement was that the United States, UK, Russia would come to the rescue of Ukraine if there were any territorial assaults, invasions of the country. Well, that happened in 2014 when the Russians invaded the eastern part of the country. And so Ukrainians have a history. They remember their history. They have a very long history. And they remember that nobody came to their rescue when the Russians decided to take a chunk of the eastern part of the country as well as Crimea back in 2014. And they're facing the same predicament right now. And so these things matter to them. And for them, at the end of the day, it is about the survival of their nation, of their land borders. And it's the clarion call I've been hearing all throughout my month and a half here, that this is not about necessarily about joining NATO or about European Union membership. This is about freedom. I hear it all the time because keep in mind, this used to be a satellite country, province of the former Soviet Union. They lived and they have experienced what it means to live under a totalitarian communist ideology. And after gaining their independence 30 years ago and experiencing a level of democracy, especially 10 years ago, they don't want to go back. They don't. Nobody wants to, here in Ukraine, wants to live like their counterparts across in Russia. They see what's happening in Russia. They don't want to live there. They see what happened to the Donbass and the Luhansk regions of Ukraine. They see what's happened in Crimea. That once the Russians come in, it's a horrible life, and they don't want that. And that's what they're fighting against, rather.
Do you see resolution anytime soon, and whether it's through war or peace? I mean, I can't believe we're already, you said it's day 27, right?
Yeah.
I can't believe we're already there. So
yeah.
how and when does this end?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I think there is some talk, there is some reporting that there are ongoing talks between the Kremlin and Kyiv in terms of, with the help of the Turks, with Erdogan, of what a potential ceasefire peace agreement would look like. I can tell you from the Ukrainian standpoint, look, in many ways, President Zelensky is emoting the very real sentiment of the Ukrainian populace, right? That's what he's supposed to do as a president of the country, is to reflect the ambitions, the desires, the fears of his countrymen. And he not only exudes this boldness, this confidence, and this sense of willingness to fight, because that is the very nature of the Ukrainians at this point. But at the same time, he sees what's happening in Mariupol, right? He sees what's happening in Kherson today, for example, innocent protesters shot at point blank because they were protesting and confronting, not in a violent way, but protesting against Russian occupation in Kherson, being targeted. So he reflects the sadness and the concern of the Ukrainian people at the same time. And keep in mind that, a month and a half ago, 2 months ago, maybe more, Zelensky's approval rating was about 20%. He was not a popular president whatsoever in the months leading up to the February 24th invasion from the February, I can't remember the day, I think it was the 24th of the invasion. Yeah, February 24th invasion. He wasn't, but right now his numbers are off the charts. And also, if you look at the way he came into power, he, in essence, when he was elected, he wanted peace. He is, I think, a man of peace. And he is attempting at every opportunity to have peace, and he's constantly asking Putin for a one-on-one meeting to talk. How does this end? I mean, who knows? I think you have three options. You have one, that the Russians completely withdraw and withdraw all of their forces, maybe not from the eastern part of the country that they currently hold, but from everywhere else that they withdraw. That's option number one. Option number two is that the Ukrainians agree to disarm, give up their aspirations of joining NATO and the European Union, and that Zelensky steps down and agrees to a puppet regime controlled by Moscow. Or three, that this continues and it just escalates. And the concern on the part of the White House right now is that Putin does feel cornered, or rather has his back against the wall. That was Biden's comments yesterday, and that their land offensive is clearly not making the kinds of military objectives, meeting their military objectives like they had hoped to. So the concern now is that because they are failing in their land maneuvers, that they are going to resort to greater sea and air campaign. And we've seen that already, right? So they're pummeling Mariupol right from the air. So I think there is some discussion right now that the State Department, the DOD, the Pentagon, is having with with their allies here in the region, in terms of providing the Ukrainians with long-range air defenses that would allow them to protect themselves from longer-range artillery fire and missile fire. Because right now, I think the frustration on the Russians is that their position, they're trying to get close, but if they're getting pushed back, that at least they settle for the positions that they're in, knowing that they can't completely encircle the capital specifically, and then just sit in these positions and fire off their missiles and their artillery as they have been doing so the last couple of days.
Okay, well, thank you for your analysis. And I think a lot of people want to know what can we do to help the people who are suffering, and how can we pray? So if you have any anything to, any advice for us who are sitting here just watching at this point, what can we do and how can we pray?
Yeah, I would be biased to say that please support groups like Operation Blessing, Orphans Promise. There are other great organizations, be it the Red Cross, Samaritan's Purse, that belongs to Franklin Graham, of the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. Churches, there are so many churches, for example, in the western part of Ukraine that have connections to those here in Kyiv, as well as in the east. There's a network. I mean, it really is a story to be done, and I'm hoping to tackle that. But there's a network, very deep network of connections between churches, and they're ferrying supplies, they're moving in stuff in, so I would say diapers, food, canned food, clothes, just partnering with those on the ground, either on the border of Ukraine and Poland, or the other borders that neighbor Ukraine, would be a great way to help. And then at the same time, pray for the churches that are in these areas, like, for example, in Mariupol, in Kherson. I've got contacts that are in Kherson, in Kharkiv, in Irpin, that have not moved, they've not left. They've told their wives and their children to leave. For example, I was in a city not too far from Makariv last week, where the men of the church, the pastors, the elders of the church, kissed their wives and their children goodbye and put them on buses and cars and sent them off to Lviv and other parts of Western Ukraine, and they stayed back. They're not moving. They say they are going to continue to serve in the churches, keep the doors open. So pray for those like Pastor Alex of the Brusilev Family Center in Zhytomyr, region in Zhytomyr Oblast who are staying, and the pastors with him to minister to the needs, because there are still people who are trapped and are trying to figure out ways to get out. And so you can definitely pray for the churches here. There, people don't realize this, but since the fall of communism and since Ukraine's independence, Ukraine has experienced tremendous religious freedom. In fact, today, Ukraine is the largest missionary sending country in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Think about that for a moment. Ukraine being the largest missionary sending country in Central Europe and in Eastern Europe rather, and Central Asia. So they have a very strong faith here. And as President Zelensky said, you can destroy our churches, our places of faith, communities, but you will never destroy our faith. And Ukrainians have a very deep Orthodox Christian background. It permeates their society, and they are people of faith. And today you are seeing those groups, be it Jewish, Muslim, Orthodox, Protestant, Evangelical, joining forces to help in the midst of this very, very difficult time.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, I mean, we'll definitely pray into that. I also want to mention there's a lot of organizations on the Israeli side ready that have gone to at least to the borders to help, and also here getting ready on the ground to receive immigrants
That's right.
And refugees. Some people who will stay and some people who will just be here temporarily. But I also want to pray for you before we go, and I just want to. We just want to bless you, George, and just pray that the Lord will just keep you safe, and that He would continue to show you the stories that He wants us to hear, and the news and the news that He wants to bring to the world. And I just pray that in your quest for truth, that you will find it, and that you'll bring it to us clearly. And we just pray for your protection, Jesus.
In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, George. It was great to talk to you, and we'll be following you for sure, and and keeping you in our thoughts and prayers. So thank you.
Thank you. So I most appreciate it. Yep. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a good day.
You too.